Begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful again for this morning, for the fellowship that we can have as we open your word together. We ask, Lord, that we can come close to you, that we can know your presence, that we can have your peace, and that as we look at some complicated things in Scripture, we ask that you can enlighten our minds, help each of us to study on our own and appreciate these things that you are showing us. We ask for your Holy Spirit to work in our lives, not just in understanding, but also in empowering us to keep your laws and to keep your commandments, and that we may reflect your character. Help us in this task of character development to continue to grow and learn and to share with others. Be with us now in our study, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we're back in Ezekiel 45. And this passage in Ezekiel 45 has caused us a little bit of difficulty and has caused a lot of people difficulty throughout the centuries. So it's not something that's
it's not a new development.
What's that?
It's not a new development.
No, it's not a new development as far as the problem, but I think that we have some light on this in the context of this message. And it's taken me a little while to sort of see it. Now, if we go back to verse 10, it says, "Ye shall have just balances, and a just ephah, and a just bath." So, as we notice, the balances refer to what? Just in a normal sense. You're measuring what?
It's a scale.
Yeah, but you're measuring what with a balance? What is it?
You're measuring weight, you're measuring character, you're measuring lots of things.
Yeah, but in this context, just the normal idea of a balance is you're measuring weight, right? And then you have a just ephah, you're measuring dry volume, and the bath is liquid volume, right? So we have these three measurements, and they apply in this context to measuring things having to do with offerings in the sanctuary. So if you're going to be offering, as in verse 13, there's going to be an offering of wheat or barley, offering of oil, or an offering of a sacrifice from a flock. These would be based upon different types of measure. Now, one of the measures would be money, because even though, shekels and so forth, we think of them as money, they're actually measurements of weight, which later became measurements of money. That is, a certain amount of gold would then replace these weights, or a certain amount of silver, a certain amount of copper. So over time, you ended up with gold and silver representing these names, where originally they were just weights of things. Now, so here, though, of course, we're talking with a balance. Now, a balance, of course, could just weigh things, but it also can weigh money. So money was weighed as well. And so you would have a certain value of gold and silver in proportion. Now, the problem with this is that 151 for verse 12, I'm not sure what that means. You're going to have to explain that.
The shekels and the...
Oh, you're talking about referring to Daniel chapter 5.
Well, Ezekiel verse 12 here is to be 151.
Okay, 151.
Get there yet? Probably.
You're kind of breaking up. I can't hear everything you're saying, so I'm hearing like half of your words.
He's probably saying that the 151 is what you get when you have 60.
Yeah, in Daniel chapter 5, if you have a shekel, 60 shekels to a manna, that gives you the 151 in Daniel 5 of the 100 126 shekels. Becomes 100 and what is it here? Meeny, meeny, tickle, upharsin.
I was looking at verse 12.
Yeah, so verse 12. So what are you saying about verse 12? Because we're
I
going
was
to look
looking
at
at I thought that added up to be 151.
how are you adding it? That's what I don't understand.
Before. I don't remember how I added it. I just have it down here.
Okay, well, when you figure it out, just put it in the chat, and then we'll look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
so there's a number of things that I noticed as I started going through this, and we started talking a little bit about it last time. Now, one of the things that I had done in trying to understand this is I read over all these different commentaries, and commentaries are going to say a lot of different things. They're not going to necessarily agree with each other, especially when it's on something like this that is not clear. Now, the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, we had looked at that before, and it gives us these references. It gives us Exodus 30:13, Leviticus 27:25, and Numbers 3:47, which we looked at. I believe we looked at all of these. So these are just verses that refer to the shekels and the giras. In this case, it's mostly the gira, I guess. These are all referring to the 20 giras to a shekel. And then in the next part, it just starts with this 20 shekels, 25 shekels, and 15 shekels. It's going to comment on that. That's 20 plus 25 plus 15 equals 60. For the manna, it's also called a minna or meaning. So it has different pronunciations or spellings in English. But for the manna, as a weight, was equal to 60 shekels, though as a coin, it was only equal to 50, weighing about 2 pounds, 6 ounces, and reckoning the shekel at 2 shillings, 6 pennies, being a value of 6 pounds, 5 shillings. So when we looked at this, we referred to they're obviously referring to British money in the old system of money before it was decimalized. And one of the things that I had remembered and I'd referenced was this idea of a guinea. Now, a guinea is 252 pence. Does that make sense to anybody what I'm talking about?
I can understand what you're saying there.
Yeah. So a guinea is £1.05. So it's actually a large pound, and it would often be used by richer people. If they're going to pay you, they might pay you instead of in a pound note, they'd pay you in a guinea. And this way you actually got paid a little bit extra, if they're trying to be nice to you. Or if you're paying at a restaurant, instead of tipping, you just pay in guineas instead of pounds.
Well, it was normal to pay a doctor in a guinea.
Yeah. Okay. Where did you get that reference?
It was I'd have to look it back up, but that was the normal understanding.
Yeah.
For that money at that time.
Yeah, and that's what I understood, is that there were certain people you paid in a guinea, or you paid in a guinea if you were trying to be nice to them or something, instead of just paying in pound notes. So I just found it interesting that, it's 252 pence or pennies to a guinea. So it just seemed very, very interesting that you had this number existing in British currency. And
sure.
Especially since British currency is extremely confusing, the old currency. I mean, how people could ever keep track of how much they're going to pay for something, I don't know. But I guess it helped, exercise their mind. It's probably one of the reasons for their sense of humor. But anyway, so when we look at this section in dealing with these shekels, 20 shekels, 5, 20 shekels, 15 shekels, the commentary that gives us the most information, that is, it goes through and explains a lot of the different views, is Keel and Dilich's commentary. So this is Keel. I can't remember his first name, but he's the one who writes the commentary for the Old Testament, Dilich for the New Testament, if I remember correctly. So he's going to address this point. I think I have to go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just. Yeah, so it starts back here. Here, I'm gonna make this larger. We need to go through parts of this, and it's not easy to really read through this. In that I've read this over dozens of times, through the years, trying to grasp the argument. So he's going to go all the way back. Let me just see where he starts with this. Okay, so he starts Ezekiel 45:12, treats the weights used for money. So the question is this about money or about weight? And I would say it's about money in Ezekiel 45:12. And one of the reasons is this would be that when you buy an offering, so sometimes you would come to the sanctuary, and the idea is that you would have to buy an offering. So remember when Christ cleansed the temple, what was one of the issues when he cleansed the temple?
Because the money changers were making a profit from the coin for the temple versus the common coin. And then the people that were selling the offerings were making a major profit because now they are discounting the money that's being used to buy those offerings.
Right. So there was basically a racket going on besides the priest itself. What's that?
The priest got a cut. The priest got a cut of everything else that was going on.
Right.
So
Now,
racket is probably the best way of putting it.
They were desecrating the temple.
Right. Yeah. So to Christ, this was really about robbery, right? I mean, you've made it a den of thieves, right? It's supposed to be a house of prayer. You've made it a den of thieves. So you had some of the most unsavory people ripping people off when they're coming and offering their offerings. So obviously here in Ezekiel 45:10, ye shall have just balances, a just ephah, and a just bath. Of course, in weighing money, there was ways in which people could deceive you about the amount of money. I don't understand all the niceties of it, how it all worked, but definitely with the money changers, they just charged, they would set a rate and people had to negotiate and so forth and how they did things. I don't understand exactly all the details. What I do know is that there was corruption going on, and that and the point here with verse 12, when you talk about this shekel, this isn't just talking about everyday life in the context here. This is about the temple. So that there's this shekel and they're defining what it is, so that when somebody comes and buys something, there isn't this exchange of money. There's just this standard that's going to be fair. So if they're buying and they're offering because they don't have a lamb, they can't bring their own lamb, they have to buy a lamb or whatever. So that's why I would say that this refers to money, not to weight, even though it's talking about shekels that's oftenly understood as weight. But when you get to the time of Ezekiel, it's pretty clear that the shekel now becomes a form of currency. It's a coin, not just a system of measure, though it is still deals with balances. So in order to deal with money, you still weigh it. So that's my understanding of it. Now he's going to say here, the shekel as the standard weight for money, which was afterwards stamped as a coin. So originally they would just weigh this amount and decide how much it was, later on they became coins, which wasn't happening here. Now it says this coin would contain 20 giras. So gira is obviously a smaller form of money. Now then it says the regulations which follow are very obscure. 20 shekels, 25 shekels, 15 shekels shall the mina be to you. The mina or mina or manna occurs only here and in 1 Kings 10:17, where it talks about these shields of gold. 3 pounds of gold went to one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Ezra 2:69, they gave them their ability unto the treasure of the work, 1,000 drams of gold and 5,000 pounds of silver, and 100 priest garments. And I believe the word there, drams, is referring to the mina. And then in Nehemiah 7:71-72, and again, it's going to use this word drams of gold, just referring to a mina. It's just, King James translators translated as drams. That is to say, only in books written during the captivity or subsequent to it. It says of, but it should say or. And then they try to say that here, if we compare 1 Kings 10:17, so he's going to go through this calculation dealing with these minas of gold for the shield. It's evident that a mina was equal to 100 shekels. So we here saying that a mina is equal to 60 shekels. Now, as the talent contained 3,000 sacred or mosaic shekels, and you can see that in looking at Exodus 38:25-26, the talent would only have contained 30 minas, which does not seem to answer to the Grecian system of weights. So he's going to go through and explain the Greek and how these are related to the Semitic mina. And then they talk about civil shekels, and that's actually half a mina or a beka. So that's in 2 Chronicles 9:16. So what he's talking about here with this this shield of gold and these shekels, he's saying that the reason why it's 30 shekels is it's actually a half a mina, which is a beka. So that would be the Perez of Daniel chapter 5. Mene, tekel, upharsin. Another name for that upharsin or Perez would be a beka, half a mina. But it, pardon me, I'm getting mixed up here. So that is a mina of bekas. So that would be still 60. I'm getting confused again. I had this sorted out, what the beka was. The beka is a half shekel. Okay, so the name of a shekel over the course of time. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I'm getting this mixed up with something else. Okay, 100 shekels or bekas made only 50 mosaic shekels. Okay, which amounted to 1 mina. So while 60 minas was also formed 1 talent. So you have 60 minas in a talent and 50 shekels in a mina, which would make that 3,000 shekels in a talent. Does that make sense to people? Or am I confusing you by me being confused?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. But the problem here is in this one passage, it looks like there is 30 shekels in a mina, but that mina would be half a mina. And that would be a mina of 50 bekas. So it's a smaller mina. So this is going to apply to Ezekiel 45:12 in a minute. Yeah, what's that?
Okay, so my question, when you're dealing with the shields, you're dealing with the scales, you're dealing with the balances, with everything else.
Yeah.
We're dealing with things that either lead up to the most holy place or are part of the judgment of the most holy place, right?
Yes.
So what we're dealing with then is when we're dealing with the the just balances, the just ephah, the just bath.
Mhm.
We're dealing with a message of judgment.
Right. And that's what these measurements are about. They're symbolizing judgment. But they've given us some very specific numbers to symbolize this judgment that nobody has understood until now. That is, we can understand this because of our message, but the people in the past couldn't understand what Ezekiel's talking about. But we now know what he's talking about, as I'm going to show you.
Okay.
Because just as we've done the measurement of the altar and the measurement of the sanctuary and the measurement of the holy possession, we saw all of these symbolic numbers that are already related to our message. So we're going to see the same thing here in Ezekiel 45:12, because we already know that we've used the shekel in understanding Daniel chapter 5, that there's 20 gerahs to a shekel. So mini tekel
Right.
upharsin gives us 126 shekels. With 20 gerahs to a shekel, he gives us 2520. And then we also made an application based on Ezekiel 45 that there's also 60 shekels to a mina. And so then we could apply that and we get 151. So if you take a mina of 60, so you go mini tekel upharsin, and you add them up, you get 151 shekels. And then we applied that to, from 1863 to 2014 is 151 shekels. And from 1888 to 2014 is 126 shekels, or years. But also we had the 126 years from 1863 to 1989, which was originally our first count of years using Daniel chapter 5. And so we had a second witness with the 60 shekels to a mina. Right? So we've already applied this, but there's something more that we never saw regarding this that relates back not to the later portion of that section directly, but to the earlier portion of those time prophecies. So we'll see how that applies here in a minute. It also applies to what Daniel Vanderhorst is doing. So there's a key to understanding Daniel Vanderhorst's lines and the dates that comes from Ezekiel 45:12. So now he's going to look at this problem here, at least solutions that people have had. And one of the solutions, or one of the, well, I'll read this paragraph and then I'll read what he says about it. But the words of the second half of the verse before us cannot be brought into harmony with this proportion. Take them how you will. If, for example, we add the three numbers together, 20, 25 plus 15 shekels shall be the mina to you, Ezekiel would fix the mina at 60 shekels. But no reason whatever can be found for such an alteration of the proportion between the mina and the talent on the one hand, or the shekel on the other. If the shekel and the talent to remain unchanged, that is, if they were to remain unchanged, and even apart from this, the division of the 60, so there's 2 points. He says that if you're going to change the mina into 60 shekels, how do you do that without changing the talent and the shekel? Because the relationship between the talent and the shekel would be that there's 3,000 shekels to a talent. So if you make 60 shekels to a mina, that means you, instead of having 60 minas to a talent, you would have to have 50. And that's not explained. So he's trying to say that this doesn't make sense. And even apart from this, the division of the 60 into 20, 25, and 15 still remains inexplicable and can hardly be satisfactorily accounted for in the manner proposed by the rabbins, or the rabbis. Namely, that there were pieces of money in circulation of the respective weights of 20, 25, and 15 shekels, for the simple reason that no historical trace of the existence of any such pieces can be found, apart from the passage before us. So he says, other than what we see in Ezekiel 45:12, we have no evidence whatsoever that there's this division of the mina into weights or forms of money, like a 25 shekel piece or a 20 shekel piece or a 15 shekel piece. Does that make sense to people? Is there any questions about that?
Well, it's 20 gerahs to a shekel, right?
Yeah, 20 gerahs to a shekel. Yeah.
Well, to me, this just affirms that it's all symbolic.
Okay, well, there is a symbolism here, right? So, and that's what I believe I've discovered what it is. And we sort of touched a bit on it last time. Now, what you're going to see here is, and I think this is important to look at how people have tried to resolve this. Basically, the human type of reasoning that goes into taking a verse from the Bible that doesn't make sense and just making up stuff to make it make sense. So this is actually Emperor Constantine observed this. It says,
I have an odd question.
Yeah.
I have an odd question before you go into this.
Okay.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the initial is that there's 50 shekels to a manna, correct?
There's 50 shekels to a manna. Yeah.
Okay. But
And
here in 45,
what's that?
okay, here in 45:12, it becomes 60
60.
to
Yeah.
a manna.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's a difference of 20%, right?
Yeah.
So what you were saying initially was you have the 50 shekels and you multiplied that by 60, right?
The 50 shekels to multiply it by 60.
Isn't that what you said?
Okay, so you have a talent is 3,000 shekels.
Right. Okay. The talent is
and so in
3,000
order
shekels.
to get the number of manna, you would have 50 shekels to a manna, which would mean you would have 60 manna or mina to a talent, right? So
Okay.
you would have here. I'll just show you a chart of this.
Well, the reason I'm asking this simply is then if there is, you said 60 mina
to a talent.
to a talent. So if then we make this change that there are now 60 shekels
Yeah.
and 60 mina, the multiplication there would take us to 3,600. Would that also not be
A biblical
another
number.
symbol? Huh?
Right. So that's a possibility, though it doesn't appear that you're going to change that talent to be that. Now, here's a chart, which I'll just make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Whoops, that's not what I want to change. I want to change this. I'll just do it this way. So here you see this chart, and here's a talent. So that's one talent. There's 60 mina to a talent, and there's 3,000 shekels to a talent, and 6,000 beka, and 60,000 gira. And then you, of course, have 50 shekels then to a manna, because that's just simple math, right? You're going to have to figure out the math of it. What is the shekel? And then obviously that's just how it works mathematically. You can't just change the shekel to 60 without changing the talent or changing the shekel. You could either make the shekel smaller, so that there's still 3,000 shekels in a talent, but so you have to modify something. Either the talent has to become larger or the shekel smaller if you're going to use the manner as the standard. So that was the issue. Does that clarify that?
Well, I see the math. I'm just trying to factor it all back in. So go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. So you have the symbol then that you said if we change the manna to 60 shekels, that would make the talent, instead of 3,000, it'd be 3,600. Right. So you're saying we could have a prophetic symbol deal with the 360. So the solution, so I want to look at these solutions first before we come back to that. So Constantine had this idea that there's one coin according to Jewish testimony that was 20 shekels, the second 25, and the third 15, as these together made one mina according to the command of God. In order that it might be manifest that each had its proper quantity, he directed that they should be weighed against the mina so that it might be known whether each had its own weight by means of the mina to which they ought to be equal. So this is just this argument that maybe it's a way of checking the weights, right? Now, when it comes to, this is Rashi, that's short for Rabbi Shlomo Itzhak or something like that. He calls him here Sal Jarki, and these different rabbis anyway, who attest to the existence of these pieces of money, not on the ground of historical tradition, but from the inference drawn from this verse. So that is, people look at this verse and just say, there must have been this division of money, but there's no evidence for it. It's just an inference drawn from the verse. And so I think that's an important point that we have to be careful how we study, because if there's no factual basis and you just look at a verse and say, well, it must be that way because the verse says it, yet maybe that verse means something else. So the human solution buries the truth to something that God is trying to show us. So then one of this is a Targum. A Targum is basically a commentary upon the Mishnah. But the phrases words thus: the third part of the mina has 20 shekels. I think I said that wrong. Anyway, about the Mishnah and Targums. Anyway, the third part of the mina has 20 shekels. A silver mina, 5 20 shekels. And the fourth part of a mina, 15 shekels. All 60 are a mina. So what they were saying is that there is these shekels of gold, one of silver and one of probably copper or something like that. So people have made all these kinds of explanations. That's the point that I want to point out here, is that in trying to understand this, people have come up with all kinds of solutions, but these solutions don't really help us much because they're not based upon anything other than speculation. So he goes on to say, the other attempts that have been made to explain the difficult words are no more satisfactory. The explanation given by, he names some people, the 3 different minas are mentioned, the smaller one of 15 mosaic shekels, a medium-sized one of 20 shekels, a large one of 25 is open to objection, justly pointed out by somebody else, that in an exact definition of the true weight of anything, we do not expect 3 magnitudes, and the purely arbitrary assumption of 3 different minas is an obvious subterfuge. So you have all these things, different kinds of metals, different points. So he says, when people try to do that, this is evidently a corruption of the very old standing in the words of the text, and we are not in possession of the requisite materials for removing it by emendation. So he says you can't just take the Bible verse and say it means this and try to add to it, because we just don't know enough about it. Now I'm saying that we now know something that these old commentators didn't know. And that's what I want to look at. So I'm going to go to a drawing which I think some of you have seen. I've done this on dealing with the story of Joseph, where I connect this 30 years of Joseph to the 30 years of Christ, and then to those 2 7-year periods of Joseph, I connect to the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, and I make the 7 years of plenty the week of Christ from the 70 weeks prophecy, And then the 7 years of famine is 252 times 7, right? So not everybody who's watching this video may be familiar with it, but what we have here is this division. The 1260 years of papal trampling can be seen as 5 times 252. And the period of pagan Roman persecution of Christians from 34 AD to 538 AD is 504 years, which is 2 times 252. And if you look at the period from 723 to 538, the 1260 years for the pagan scattering, which is followed by the 1260 years for the papal trampling, you can take this first half from 723 to 34 AD is 3 times 252. And of course, you can see that if I take this 2 and this 3 and add them together, it's 5 times 252, just like the latter half is. So that's just logical math. What ended up happening is, as I was studying this, me and Stephen, this was in 2016, I recognized this 7 times 252, and Stephen asked me to count it backwards. When I did that, I came to the date that I had for the death of Jacob. And that ends this chiasm in the story of Joseph, where he's 17 years with his family, 22 years apart, and then 17 years again with his family until Jacob's death. And what I had noticed is that if you started from there and you took this 7 times 252, which is 17,064 years, it could be divided by these 2 periods of 756 years. This first period of 252 is the time from the death of Jacob until the complete conquest of the promised land. And that's 40 years and 7 7 years to possess the land, and 7 years to get rest from their enemies in this 54-year period here, and the 198 years left over from the 215 years from when they entered into Egypt, subtracting these 17 years. So the 215 minus 17 is 198, and then you add this 54 years, and so you have this period of 252 years, and then 2 periods of 756 years. So from when they get the land, they've completely had the complete conquest of the promised land, there's 3 times 252 years to 723 when Hoshea is taken captive, and then another 756 years to 34 AD. So I know this is kind of a brief summary of something that would be a longer study. The point that I want to make here is that we have some periods of time. This period here of 756 plus 252 is how many years? I don't know if you can see that.
1008.
So 1008. And then we have a period, of course, of 756 years. So you have 1008, a period of 756. And we also have this period of 504 years, period of 1260 years. So we have these different proportions, if we wanted to call them that, of this time prophecy. And we can all break them down instead of into lengths of, years. You can break them down, divide them all by 252, and you get these simple integers, 5, 7, 2, 3, 4, etc. Does that make sense to people? That if we take these larger numbers and we divide them by 252, they still become whole integers, just small integers.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, so the fact that we can do that we have these simple ratios of the prophetic periods is very profound. But that they're ratios that are based upon dividing them by the number 252. That is, the number 252 gives us these simple integers. So this is something that's very unlikely that we would have this occur in these time prophecies that for most Adventists are unrelated, and many of them that we don't even accept. But yet we can acknowledge these dates. So when we look at this money, we had talked about this, so I'm going to go to the whiteboard. And so I have to stop the share and switch cameras. So we talked about this. These are called special right triangles. So if I have a triangle where this side is 3 and this side is 4, what is this side?
5.
5.
Right, it's 5. And that's based upon this formula, A plus B plus equals C. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Everybody know what this Pythagoras' theorem of the right triangles or of triangles? So we have a right triangle. Whatever the square of this side is, 4 times 4 is 16.
Right.
3 times 3 is 9. And 5 times 5 is 25. If you add 16 plus 9, you get 25. Right? So that's the rule of the right triangle. And that's the formula for it. Now, what I had done last year is I was looking at this right triangle, and I was looking at relationships between numbers. And what I had done is I had taken this and multiplied it by 88. So if I take this, what's 4 times 88? 3 times 88, and 5 times 88.
3 times 88 is 264.
Yeah.
4 times 88 is 352.
Yeah.
5 times 88 is 440.
Okay. So for me, this was interesting as a musician because that means if I did this would be 440, and the note A equals 440 cycles per second. That's how you tune a guitar. You get a tuning fork that's tuned to 440 cycles per second. You hit the harmonic on the 5th string, 5th fret, and it's going to match up with that tuning fork. And then from there, you can tune your guitar. And then if I go 3 times 260 by 88, I get this number, which is middle C, 264. So 264 cycles per second is middle C. And this other number, 352 cycles per second, is the note F. And this is an F chord, FAC. Right now, this would be an F chord, the lowest note being C. It'd be called an F with a C in the bass. That's how a guitarist would write this chord. But it's an F chord. It's the second inversion of an F chord is the way that we would describe it. Anyway, the point is this number 264, what is this number? What is it beside middle C? What's that?
26th day of the 4th month.
So it's the 26th day of the 4th month. So for me, this was just interesting that this number, the 26th day of the 4th month, was also middle C. And it meant something to me as a musician. Does anybody know why middle C is called middle C?
I'm not a musician, so no, I can't give you that answer.
So
I have no
most
idea.
people will know that if you see middle C, it'll look like this. It'll have a line. It'll be below the staff, below the treble clef. This is the bass clef. And you'll see this note. So if you just saw a treble clef by itself and you saw this ledger line, it's called, and you saw this note, you would know that that's middle C. But the reason why it's called middle C is it's actually the center of this structure, which is called the grand clef, which is a bass clef And the notes just go up alphabetically, starting here, A, B, or pardon me, as it goes, I have to think. Okay, C, A, yeah, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, and you just keep going up. You would write ledger lines for your notes up there. So the thing about the middle C is it's the middle of a chiasm in a sense. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So there's something about this number, this 264, that we have used for middle C in the present day. In the past, C used to be lower. Some people have argued for a C of 256. But the point is, with the 440, that's the standard 264. Now,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So the 26th day of the 4th month. Okay. A at 440 cycles is interesting because that's the number of animals that Jacob gave to Esau to be reunited with him, and it's also twice the number of reunion.
Right. So it's double of 220.
Okay, so what's the symbolic representation of F?
I haven't figured out yet. There's probably something.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm just going, wow. Okay. Everything else has a symbolic representation, right. So there's got to be something here with F.
Yeah, there has to be. I just don't know what it is yet. I was just excited about that part of it. Now, the next thing that I did is I used this same triangle, but I made this, instead of times 88, I'll do it this way, 3 times 252, 4 times 252, and 5 times 252. Right? So I can take those periods from that structure of the prophetic structure, and I can put them on this triangle as well. So 3 times 252, we remember, was 756.
756.
And 4 times 252 was
1008.
Yep. So on this side it'll be 1008, and then 5 times 252 was 1260. So I tell you this because when we look at this division then of the shekels here, this is 15, 20, and 25.
Right.
So that would be, that adds up to the 60 shekels, but this would
Correct.
just be the same. So this is just 5 times 4, and this is 3 times 5, and I should have done it the other way, 4 times 5. And this is 5 times 5.
Right.
Right? So you can see that what Ezekiel is describing is a ratio. And that is the same ratio that we see in Pythagoras's rules of the right triangle. And the simplest form of that, the lowest one, is 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
So to me, that's pretty profound that exists, that ratio exists in this description of the manna. Does that make sense? That we can now say that this is talking about a prophetic ratio that exists in the time periods that we've been given, and also in symbols that we've been given regarding time periods, dates and such.
Okay, right.
Okay. Now, the other place we want to look, so I know this, I'm trying to take my time with this so that everybody understands it. I know it's, you're going to have to think about it, probably watch the video over again and look at some of these verses that we looked at last time. So I'll go back to here. So again, you can see we have these proportions, the 2 times 252, the 3 times 252, or the 3 and the 4 and the 5. We have them in here, but they're just ratios, right? So they're ratios that are related to each other in simple numbers, and those exist in that manna. Now, we also have used shekels. If we go to Numbers 3, so let's go there. And this relates to the study on the 273. So Numbers chapter 3, we're going to have the Levites, they're going to be counted. And so some people watching this may not be familiar. I think most of you are familiar with it who are with us in this study. But what ends up happening is you have, they're going to count, the Levites are going to replace the firstborn, right? So the idea is that the firstborn son is, he gets the inheritance, which includes the double portion, the priesthood, and the kingship, right? So there's these 3 aspects that are included in this inheritance, and they were being passed down by the patriarchs. And when I talk about the patriarchs, I'm referring to those people who are passing down to their sons this inheritance. Where does that change in the Bible? Where does it not, where does the firstborn is no longer the one who receives the inheritance?
Well, it happens in the line of Jacob.
Right. So it happens with Jacob. And specifically what happens is that Jacob, he doesn't just give one of his sons all of those attributes. He divides it to 3 different sons. So in the blessings that Jacob gives to his sons, I think it's, I always forget which one it is.
Okay, now, as a question though,
Yeah.
could we also not say that it in a type, it begins with Isaac when the blessing is given to Jacob instead of being given to Esau?
Yes. So it's foreshadowed. And I think that's why with Jacob, he now divides it among his sons.
Right, because
Jacob had gained it in a sense by deceit.
well, the issue that you have with Jacob and his sons, his firstborn could not receive any of the blessing because he slept with his stepmother.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah.
Reuben.
Yeah, Reuben couldn't receive it. Yeah.
Okay. Simeon could not receive it. He was the secondborn because he was really the instigator of the sale of Joseph.
Okay, well, Judah's the one that sold Joseph. I would look at Judah. He's the one who sold
But
him.
there's a part with, from what Mrs. White had written, that Simeon was the one that was really the instigator of the whole situation.
Yeah, the whole
Judah
situation.
sold it.
But Judah ended up, in order to sort of not end up with Joseph being killed, he suggested that they get profit. Right. So yeah. Okay. Good.
Okay. And then the next born, I believe it was either Levi or Judah.
Yeah.
If it was Judah, he received the blessing that the lineage of Christ would come through him.
Yeah. The kingship.
Levi wound up as the priest.
Yeah.
And then the double portion was given to the eldest son of Rachel because he was the favored son. That's Joseph.
Right. And that's why Ephraim and Manasseh each they become a tribe.
Right.
That's the double portion for Joseph. Exactly. So we see that this division occurs. And one of the things that I find interesting about this is this idea of a division that God has divided things. We saw it with the 70 weeks. It is divided. It's not just 70 weeks. We see this now with this, the money, the talents, the mina, right? So we see that it is divided into separate talents for a purpose. And we go back to this division. This division occurs also in the blessings of Jacob's son. Now, the other thing that happens is that Levi, as the priesthood, he replaces the firstborn in regard to the role of the priesthood. So when you go to Numbers 3, what's occurring is how to maneuver this, because there's a responsibility. They have to, in a sense, be redeemed. The firstborn have to be redeemed. And so now the Levites, in taking up on that role, there's this rather complicated, at least to me, implications or story that's being told about it. So it says, the Levites are going to be the firstborn. It says in verse 12 of chapter 3, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. For on the day that I smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. Mine shall they be, I am the Lord. So then so does that make sense to everyone? I mean, if you're watching this video, if it doesn't make sense to you, I can't answer that question. But anybody here is that difficult to understand, or is that straightforward?
No, I mean, for me, it's straightforward, but I've looked at this a few times.
Right. So somebody looking at, the first time, it may not be that familiar. Anyway, it says here, the number of the Levi after the household of their fathers by their families. Every male from a month old and upward shalt thou number them. And so he's going to number the children of Levi, every male from a month old and upward. And so when they number these, you're going to number them from Kohath and Merari and Gershom. Those are the three sons of Levi. And so these are the tribes. So this is like 215 years after they had gone into Egypt. Now they have these tribes. They've multiplied. And these are the names of the sons of Gershon by their families, Libni and Shimei and so forth. Those names aren't all that important. What we need to know is that there's a total given. And those that were numbered of them according unto the number of all the males from Gershon, the Gershonites, from a month old and upward, even those that were numbered of them were 7,500. So I'm going to draw this on the board right now, but I'll not go to the screen yet. So that's okay, Gershon.
You have just provided an answer that I wasn't figuring out before, because that means that the blessings became first the priest, then the lineage, then the double portion.
Okay, explain that a bit more. I'm not.
Okay, Levi was older than Judah.
Okay, right.
So because the role of the priest was that important within the family, that when you sought to become the priest of the family, that all of the other blessings were added on to you because you were honoring God first.
Right. And so that firstborn blessing is being passed to the Levites primarily.
Right.
But the other aspects, the double portion and the kingship, they're going to be given to Joseph and Judah.
Right. But in the order of birth, it means then that because of what Reuben had done, he could not receive any of it.
Right.
With what Simeon had done, he was deceitful, so he could not receive any of it because he would not have been a just priest.
Yeah, and then it goes to then Levi and Judah in the order of their ages.
Right.
And then it skips to Joseph because he's the firstborn of Rachel.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Okay, so, and then it's going to count, after it counts the Gershonites, it's going to count the Kohath. So the Kohath is another son of Levi. And when it counts those, it's going to be 8,600. So again, I'll come back to this whiteboard afterward. So what did I say these numbers were?
3, 4, 5.
Yeah, so 8,600. And what was the number? It was 7,500 for Gershon.
Okay.
Right.
Well, see, we can't see, we're not seeing the screen, so.
No, I know. I'm just, but what we read there.
Right.
If I go back, it was 7,500. Yeah. And now it's 8,600. And then the final one is Merari. And his number is in verse 34. We're 6,200. Okay. So now let's go to the whiteboard here. Okay, so here's what I wrote. Should be able to see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look at this number and you add them up, what number do we get? So we add up, it's going to be 22,000 and how much?
You've got 22,300.
Right. So we have 22,300. Now, we're gonna look further at this, but this becomes extremely significant because there is what most people see as another puzzle of some kind of mistake or something that doesn't make sense. And I've always found when there's something in the Bible that doesn't make sense, it's because something has been hidden. So we're going to go on and read what they're going to do. So they're going to redeem the firstborn. Now, they have counted all of the firstborn of all the other tribes. And you're going to find that in verse 43. And all the firstborn males of the number of names from a month old and upward, of those that were numbered of them, were 22,013. So, and the verse before, and Moses numbered as the Lord commanded him, all the firstborn among the children of Israel. So when you look at all the other tribes, you have 22,273. And so now they're going to redeem the difference, but you're going to find something very odd. So hopefully people are following this. If not, you just have to watch it over and read it over. So he says in verse 35, take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites instead of their cattle, and the Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord. So he's going to take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel. So how many do we have of the firstborn of the children of Israel? Verse 43. It said 22,213, which is 22,273.
Right.
Okay. And then we know that we have 22,300 of all of the children of Levi, all the men, right?
Right.
So it's not the firstborn of Levi, it's just all of the children. But with the Israel, it's just the firstborn. So that means the Levites, all of them, are going to replace the firstborn, or they're going to be taken instead of the firstborn. So the firstborn have to be redeemed. So they have to pay some money to redeem them. And this is where it gets really interesting. So it says, for those that are to be redeemed of the 200 of the firstborn of the children of Israel, which are more than the Levites. So it says it's more, but didn't we have 22,300?
Right.
So wouldn't there be more Levites than the firstborn?
Correct.
But it's not saying that. It says there's 213. So the question is, why are they not counting the 300? Why is it counting it as 22,000 instead of 22,300? And you read the commentaries, they have all kinds of theories, but no one has an answer. Right? Nothing that's satisfactory. But let's go on and read what happens. It says, thou shalt take even 5 shekels apiece by the pole. After the shekel of the sanctuary shalt thou take them. The shekel is 20 gerahs. So this is one of the verses we are given to know that a shekel has 20 gerahs.
Right.
And so we're going to pay 5 shekels apiece for each of these of the children of Israel. So there's 273, and you multiply it by 5, and you get 1,365. So here I'll go to the board here in a minute. So you have 1,365 shekels that need to be paid. Now, who's paying the shekels to who? Anybody figure that out? Because
isn't it the parents are paying this to the temple?
Okay. So somebody's paying it, right? So you're saying the parents are paying this. So which parents are going, which ones are the different ones, right? Because if you're saying that there's 273 different, and obviously you're not going to just arbitrarily pick 273 parents that have to pay that.
Or this money,
what's that, Stephen?
the tribes are paying Levi or Aaron and his sons.
Okay, so the tribes are going to be paying. Now, why would they be paying? Because who are they redeeming as such? We know that the firstborn would be given to God, but now the Levites are going to be given. So what's the reason then that they're paying the Levites? The tribes are paying the Levites.
They're kind of buying back their firstborn.
Okay, right. So they're buying back their firstborn. So God doesn't have the firstborn anymore. It took me a while to figure this out. So they're buying back their firstborn. And so then the Levites are free to be gods, right? So they have to be redeemed. So I would think that all of the tribes would have to divide this up somehow to pay this money to get their firstborn back. So that money would then go to the Levites or the temple. So it says you take these 5 shekels apiece. So there's 273 and it's 5 shekels. Now, how many tribes are there in this story?
Technically, there are 12. But with Levi being set aside, that means 11 tribes.
Oh, okay.
There's 13.
Yeah, I know there's 13, actually.
Right. So the 13 is because Ephraim and Manasseh.
Right.
Right. Now, sometimes Ephraim is referred to as Joseph, but so you have, if you're naming Joseph, you're not going to name Ephraim. You're going to name Joseph and Manasseh, or Ephraim and Manasseh. But there's 13. Now, the Levites then aren't one of the 12 tribes in the way that the land is divided. So the Levites only end up with cities scattered throughout the 12 tribes. So they don't get a possession as such. They're just the cities of the Levites. And when they would serve in the temple, there would be this course of of priests and Levites that would then have their time to serve. So that would be spread throughout the year. And from what I remember, they have this name, like there's the course of Abijah, which I'm familiar with, based upon different names of people who that they're connected to. So they have some kind of division or organized system of labor so that the Levites only work 1/12 of the year in the temple that they serve, except that they also serve, all of the Levites serve during the feasts. So Passover, all the Levites would be there, and same in the Day of Atonement and the fall feasts. So they have the time that they serve in the temple, 1/12 of that time, and then the time that they serve, that everyone serves in these major feasts. So that we have, anyway, the point is we have 13 tribes. Now, if we take this number, so I'm going to go here, back to the board. So that number was 273 times 5, which equals 16, was it 1365? Yeah. That's the number of shekels that needs to be paid. Now, if you take this number and you divide it by 13, what do you get?
Is it 105?
Yeah, you get 105. And what is 105 a symbol of?
The 10th day of the 5th month.
Right. So this is the 10th day of the 5th month, which is the date that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and in 586 AD. Right? So when we go to Ezekiel and we connect these with Ezekiel, we can see this relationship. And any questions on this?
Not yet, no.
Now, if I take 105 and I multiply it by 12, what do I get?
1260.
Okay. So this number here is connected, this 273 and this 1260 and this 10th day of the 5th month are all represented symbolically in this story. But remember, they said the difference between these is 273, and we can see that that's not the case. So why is this 300 not included when they do the math? So if we have this many of all the children of Israel, or pardon me, of all the Levites, and this of all the children of Israel, why are 300 Levites not counted? What is the 300?
I don't have an answer.
Okay. Well, what does 300 represent?
Later in the Bible, you've got your 300 with Gideon.
Right. So we have 300 with Gideon. And 3 is a symbol of the prediction before midnight. Now, the reason that we don't count this 300 is not given in this passage or anywhere that I know of in the Bible in any clear way. But there's an implication somehow that there are 300 who are separated out from among the Levites that are not counted in this calculation, right? Because this is the number of the children of Israel. This is the number of the Levites based on what we added together here. But we can see then that obviously this can't be, this 300 has to be some special group or class that is not going to be, that doesn't need to be redeemed.
Could it be rounding down to the nearest 1,000?
No, that wouldn't make any sense.
I know, but it seems to be have happened, but for some reason. I'm just wondering if
I don't think they're rounding down to the nearest 1,000 because they're doing a mathematical calculation. And you're not going to do that. You're not going to count these people, give this exact number, and say, well, we're just going to round it down. We're going to take 100 off each of these.
Could it be applying some meaning to the 22,000? 22 relating to like a restoration of some way happening in this story?
Well, they could be, but I think there's something more happening than what we see on the surface. So this doesn't tell us why we took the 300 out, but the thing is we did take the 300 out. Now, it could be that these are 300 who are of the Levites, but are not able to serve in the sanctuary for some reason. It could be that these are a class of priests or something like that. It doesn't tell us. But I'm just saying that these ones, what we know is that 300 are not going to be included in the calculation. Whatever the reason, it doesn't really matter, except to know that that's what happens. And I don't just think it would be a rounding down. I think that there would be a specific reason why. We're just not told why they do that in the calculation. But the fact is that it's 300 gives us this symbol. And I have some more ideas about it, which I want to explore a little bit later on, but not today, because we're running out of time. But one of the things we can see here is we have these numbers, the 273, the 1260. And we know in the story of Acts 27, we also do some measuring. We measure, what do we measure in Acts 27?
Well, we have 200.
Okay, fathoms, right? And what are these fathoms? Anybody remember Acts 27?
So 2520.
Yeah, so
72 inches.
so a fathom, 72 inches, and that measurement comes from measuring the water as they're coming towards the island. And the measurement that's given is they're going to measure first one measurement and then another. Does anybody remember the numbers?
15 and 20.
Okay, so there's 15 fathoms and 20 fathoms. So one of the things we see, the 15 and the 20 that we see in Ezekiel 45:12. But of course, it's not talking about shekels, it's talking about fathoms. And 20 fathoms is how many inches? If there's 72 inches to a fathom.
1440,
So 1440. And then the 15 fathoms?
and that was 1080.
Okay, 1080. Now, how many minutes are there in a day?
Uh, 1,400 and, or sorry, 1,440.
So you have 24 hours in a day times 60 minutes, and you get that same number, right? So I'll do this here again. So in our day, there is this many minutes. Now, does anybody know how many
Halakam.
Halakam? Okay, so I was trying to think of the name of them. So
Or
this is
Halak.
how the Jews divide the hour, right? So instead of taking seconds and minutes, they have this thing which is 3 1/3, what would be 3 1/3 seconds. And how many of them are in an hour? Well, it's this number. So when you take those inches and you multiply them by 15 fathoms, it becomes this many inches. And if you take the 20 fathoms, it becomes this many inches. But you can see that this Halakam, I'll call him Hal. Does this make sense? So one of the things you see in Acts 27 is that you have this representation of time. Does everybody see that? That these are symbols that we would recognize as representing the number of minutes in the day, and that the Jews would recognize as representing the number of divisions of an hour.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, so what I'm looking at here when I look at this story in or vision, it's not really a story, in Ezekiel 45, and we're looking at these numbers, these proportions. Are we looking at time?
I don't see it as time.
What do you see it as?
I'm trying to wrap my mind around it as time, but I'm not seeing it yet as time.
Okay, well, we took this manna and we divided it and we drew a triangle, and we
Right.
could show that gives us a division or proportion that we could relate to the time prophecies that we already have.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so when we look at Ezekiel 45:12, and they're talking about all these measurements, you have to have just balances, a just ephah, a just bath. We obviously know that this is a measurement that is meant to give us accuracy, to discern between truth and error, right and wrong,
Okay.
righteous and unrighteous. And everything so far in Ezekiel, we've been able to relate to the time prophecies. So the question is, can we relate these to the time prophecies?
To the time prophecies, yes.
Yes. So we can understand that this is a message in relation to time in Ezekiel. And even when we go back to Ezekiel chapter 40, remember, he's measuring with this reed that's 126 inches, and that we can relate Ezekiel 40 to Revelation chapter 11 with the 1260 years. So we can see that everything here in this last part of Ezekiel is relating to the time prophecies. And he's asking us to consider, to examine things. When he talks about the altar, all of these things, the offerings, everything that we're supposed to consider it and examine, and we're supposed to show it to the house of Israel. And what is it that we're supposed to show to the house of Israel?
The prophetic relations.
Right. We're showing them the prophecies, because that's the thing that's going to bring this revival among God's people, is this understanding. Now, the only ones who will understand it are who? Who's going to understand? What? What's that?
The wise.
The wise, right? So there are people all over the world who are studying and who are going to be able to understand this message. What happens to the people who don't understand it?
They fall into darkness.
Right. And is this understanding based upon intelligence?
No, it's based upon your application of how you want to study.
Right. So even the simplest person can understand these truths. When we don't understand them, the problem is not intellect. The problem is a spiritual one. And we've seen this in this message, people who don't understand the message. And it's something that bothers me a lot, because all it tells me is that somebody's not studying. It's not really about intelligence. Sure, it might take a certain amount of intelligence to understand certain aspects and details, to dig into some things in a certain way. But without God, nobody, no matter how intelligent, is going to understand these things. People have applied, with much better minds than any of ours, have applied themselves to these things and have come up empty. But yet God has led this movement to give us an understanding of these things. And they take a lot of thought, they're not easily obtained. They take a lot of digging. But the thing is, they are attainable to understand them, right? So we can understand these things. Now, some of us may not be able to do the math that well because we're not mathematical. We may have a hard time memorizing some of the numbers, but we should be able to study them and work through them and see that they're correct. So I'm arguing here that this division, which we also have related to Daniel chapter 5. So we're just not going to have time to look at that. But in Daniel chapter 5, we know that we have the mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. We have again shekels being used. And we had it in Numbers chapter 3. And we also had not shekels, but fathoms being used in Acts 27. And all of these we can relate to the 2520. That can't be accident. So there's a purpose in this. What's that?
They're not accidents.
Not accident. Now, when we look at, so I'm actually preparing a paper that I'm going to eventually send to everybody because I'm going through all this weights and measures and going to try to explain it in a paper so that people can benefit by going over it. But we're going to also have then in verse 13 and 14, we're going to have, so this is just the last thing I want to show you. So let's just look at 13, 14, and 15, and then we'll be done for today. This is the oblation that ye shall offer. So these are a gift offering. The sixth part of an ephah of a homer of wheat. So an ephah is how much of a homer? Does anybody know?
I think, is that a tenth?
It's a tenth. And so you have a sixth part of an ephah. That would be how much of an omer? Six times 10. So you have a 60th, right? A 60th.
Yeah.
Okay. And you shall give a sixth part of an ephah of a homer of barley. So the same thing happens again. 1/60th. So when it comes to the wheat offerings, the grain offerings, you're going to offer 1/60th of a homer. Now, when it comes to the oil offerings, so these are the libations or whatever, concerning the ordinance of oil, the bath of oil, ye shall offer a tenth part of a bath out of the core, which is a homer of 10 baths. So how many baths are in a core?
Would it be 60 again?
So there's, well, okay, no. So 10 baths are a homer. So you got 10 baths in an omer, and the 10th part of a bath out of the core. Now, I should have looked up this word again, but this is just basically a 10th part of a bath out of, and a bath, there's 10 baths in a homer. So what part of oil are they presenting from a homer? Because the homer and the ephah are supposed to be equal, which is verse 11, right? Verse 11, it says, the ephah and the bath shall be of one measure. So whatever you use to measure an ephah, a dry goods, the bath shall be the same measure. That the bath may contain the 10th part of an omer, and the ephah a 10th part of an omer. The measure thereof shall be after the homer or omer, right? So then, if you're going to have a 10th part of a 10th part, how much is that?
100.
So 100. So it goes 60th and then 100th. Now when it comes to the lamb out of the flock, out of 200, out of the fat pastures of Israel, for a meat offering and for a burnt offering, for a peace offering, and to make reconciliation for them, saith the Lord God. So what is the lamb? What part out of the flock? Out of 200. So what would that be?
Well,
1 out of 200. So that's
right, 200. Yes.
1/200. Okay. So here is what we have. Whoops. Yeah, I didn't put that up on the screen. Sorry about that. So you couldn't see it. But so we're going to have the grain. That's going to be
1/60th.
1/60th, and then the oil, 1/100th,
Right.
and then the lamb, 1/200th. Now, this is not how you really do fractions, but if you added these together, what would you get? So what do we have
Really?
being represented here? A day for a year, right?
Right.
Okay. So again, we can see we have time symbolically represented in these fractions. Okay. So I would argue that the purpose of Ezekiel for us is an affirmation of the message that we gave regarding July 18th. Does that sound like
It's plausible.
plausible? Yeah. It seems very, very likely that we're understanding this, we're studying this at this very time. Now, there are some other things that relate to Daniel Vanderhorst's vision or dream that he had, that he then put on a line and found out some things, and I found out more things. And he wasn't the first one that did that. So we know that Robert Holmes also had a dream, which he had this date of December 5th. So there's two different people that came up with this December 5th date in dreams, so, or related to it through a dream. And we also have things that they have in their structures that we find here in Ezekiel and in other places in the Bible that are sort of unexpected. And we can also relate then, even this triangle that we have, we can relate it to these proportions that exist. So there's these proportions that God has given us, these balances, these just balances, this just ephah and this just bath that are going to help us to measure the temple, to understand that the temple is about, what is this message about? What is the everlasting gospel? What does it accomplish?
It brings us to an understanding of justification, sanctification, and judgment. So it gives us the understanding of the three-step testing message.
Right, which produces
Three classes of worshippers.
new classes of worshipers, and it demonstrates them. And that's what we see in this whole thing, is it's about judgment. And judgment isn't just about the righteous, it's also about the wicked. It's judging between the true and the false, the good and the bad, the righteous and the unrighteous. And how is that then exercised practically based on what we've studied here in Ezekiel? What is it that does that work? Wouldn't it be time prophecies?
Right.
So time prophecies are given as these just balances, this just ephah, this just bath. And our response to them, it's the reception of the message. People should watch Daniel's presentation. He reads some really good Spirit of Prophecy quotes and really brings out the understanding of them. And not because he's some eloquent orator. It's just, there's just this simple honesty as he looks at these passages and we see what they're talking about. And it's always been about the reception of the message. God has given us a message, and how we receive that message is going to determine our destiny. That's all there is to it. The message is clear, and we have to receive it correctly. And the problem is that many people don't receive it because light shines in darkness and darkness does not comprehend it because their deeds are evil. Those that love the light come to the light that their deeds might be exposed. right? That's why they want to come to the light. They want their sins to be dealt with. So anyway, that's the end of the study. I know it's a little difficult in some ways, but I am going to write out a paper so that people can go through it. So any final comments before we close with prayer?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Okay, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful for this time. We're very privileged to be able to understand these things at this time in Earth's history. Many people are in darkness, but you have given us light, and it is disproportionate to who we are as a person. We know, Lord, that this light is not something that we deserve. It's something that you give us because you love us and care for us, and that you're giving this light to all who will willingly receive it. We ask, Lord, that we can have a heart that is open to these truths, that we can see the sins that lie deep within us, that make us resistant to light, the pride, the self-sufficiency, all these things that unfit us for the work that you have for us. These things can be removed. Be with each person watching these videos and help us as we continue to study through the book of Ezekiel. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.